innovation, science, a high-level expert group, and we give advice to the Commissioner of Research and Innovation and also to the Commission and Parliament. So after those excellent speeches, what we just heard, I don't think I need to do much introduction into the topic of open science, into incentives and barriers of open science. We all understand it is happening, and our task is to think how to remove obstacles and develop enablers. We heard about the public consultation on Science 2.0, which is more or less now renamed to Open Science, and I understand, which was carried out in summer 2014, and we heard about the barriers which have been identified. I think here we don't have to persuade anybody, to convince anybody about the importance of open science. I think rather our task would be really to think about concrete obstacles, concrete policy measures, and what different stakeholders, universities, publishers, which we have today here, or the Commission should and could do to enhance these processes. We have distinguished panelists here, 5 people, and I'm honored to introduce them. First, our panelist is Professor Kurt Teketelere, who is Secretary General of the League of European Research Universities. And before joining the LERU, he was the Chief Legal Advisor and Chief of Staff of the Flemish Minister for Public Works, Energy, Environment and Nature. He's also Professor of Law at the University of Leuven. Then another panelist, we have Professor James Wilson. James is Professor of Science and Democracy at the University of Sussex. He's also a chair of independent review of the role of metrics in research assessment by the Higher Education Funding Council for England, and that report will come out next month. Our next panelist is Dr. Catriona McCallum, who is currently Senior Advocacy Manager at PLOS, Public Library of Science, and a consulting editor on PLOS ONE. She is also a member of the board of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, and most recently she was part of the independent panel reviewing the implementation of RC UK's policy on open access. And then we have Professor Eva Mendes. Eva is Deputy Vice President for Strategy and Digital Education from Madrid Carlos III University. She holds a PhD in Library and Information Sciences and is an expert in metadata. In her Twitter profile, she defines herself as an open knowledge militant. She's a tenure professor at the university since 2008. And our last but not least panelist is Wim van der Stelt. Wim is Executive Vice President for Corporate Strategy at Springer, and he has been responsible for corporate and publishing strategy at Springer since the merger with Clover Academic in 2004, and right now his focus is on managing the transition to the Open Access, keep on serving the academic communities while at the same time setting the conditions for open access. So they are our 5 great distinguished panelists. We also have a rapporteur here who will write down all the great ideas and will report them to the big session. His name is Thomas Cruzier. He's from Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. And Dr. Cruzier is a researcher experienced in the fields of biomaterials and biopolymers. And he has started a blog called Connected Researchers.com about new online tools that are revolutionizing the way science is done in academia. He writes to promote the use of these new tools and project researchers into the 21st century. And I'm, as I said, my name is Toivo Maimets, and when I'm not member of the research group, I'm a professor of cell biology at the University of Tartu in Estonia. So we heard about the public consultation paper, which identified numerous key challenges to the science, open science, performance and development of open science, lack of incentives, credits, acknowledgement, rewards, current way of the assessment of impact and quality, current mindset, dominant culture, lack of skills, legal barriers, and no full-fledged open access policy. So my first question to the panelists would be, after having this list of challenges and barriers, do you think you agree with this list? What do you think? What is the biggest challenge when thinking about development of open science? And is anything missing from this list? And I would give not more than 3 minutes per answer. And I would start then from Kurt, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be on the panel this afternoon. Well, obviously, open science is for the League of European Research Universities, for LERU, a crucial issue, because obviously this is going to determine to a large extent the future research and innovation policy in the 21st century. And obviously, LERU fully supports the institutional and the government policy developments on this issue. That's also the reason why we, of course, fully participated in the consultation, and that we also hosted one of the validation seminars of the consultation on open science. It's clear, and you will have seen that, unfortunately I couldn't attend the first part of the afternoon, but you certainly will have heard that there are a number of clear benefits to be expected from open science. But obviously, and that's what is worrying us to a certain extent, there are obviously also a number of barriers which will have to be tackled before this open science really can flourish, I would say. And taking into account the 3 minutes, I would only like to focus on 3 specific issues that I would like to mention, Chair. First of all, and this has also been proven by the outcome of the consultation, there is this, of course, important worry on quality assurance of new and non-traditional research outputs. And those outputs can take many forms. I just want to mention one. And although in the consultation, citizen science wasn't seen as a big driver for open science, although that in all the validation seminars afterwards, it was nonetheless pointed out that this was an important development. Obviously, we have seen at the European level over the past few weeks the whole development of this ECI on the use of animals for scientific research. And I must say that from the side of LERU, we were very much worried and disappointed by the lack of quality of the data which were put forward in the framework of this European Citizens Initiative. And so for us, it's important that in the future, if open science is going to play a major role, that we are sure about quality and quality assurance issues. I will come back later on in the following questions on a number of those aspects. A second element that I want to bring forward is that although we are all very enthusiastic, I think, about open science and the different forms that open science can take, it's clear that we see at the EU level a kind of contradiction going on. On the one hand, we have this big enthusiasm, this enormous enthusiasm for this development. But on the other hand, we see, and certainly as a lawyer, that's an important issue for me, we see that the necessary legal frameworks that we need in order to make sure that this open science really can develop, that those legal frameworks are staying behind or are even going to become more problematic than what we have now. If I refer, for example, just by coincidence to the REDA report of last week on the Information Society Directive, which is anticipating the whole copyright reform, then this really has been a fantastic disappointment, the attitude by the European Parliament. If I look at something else that happened last week in the Council of Justice Ministers, the general approach on the regulation which is coming up on general data protection. This has become an unreadable document, a completely unreadable document, even for lawyers like me. If I refer to open access, what is going on there, where we are building 28 different schemes of open access in Europe, well, then it's clear that all those developments are completely in contradiction with what open science is needing. For open science, we need a European-wide level playing field on all those issues, and it's clear that we will have to move forward on that. And a third element, and then I'm certainly already at my 3 minutes, I think, a third element, and that certainly for us as universities, one of the responsibilities that we are absolutely willing to take, and I will dwell upon that in my second intervention, is the issue of awareness rising and support from the academic community. It's clear that we as universities, being aware of this important development, that we also must make our own staff members aware of that we must be able to involve our researchers into these developments. But it is clear that if we want to get our researchers involved in those developments, that as universities we will have to reflect on HR policies, what our promotion policies are going to look like in the future. What are we going to evaluate our people upon? Are it the traditional books and journal articles in paper format, or are all those new developments that we see passing by, are they also going to be translated into the policies that we develop, as well with regard to HR, as well with regard to funding of science, as well with regard to doctoral training and things like that. So these are three important issues, Chair, that I just wanted to indicate at the beginning of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So evaluation, legal framework and awareness rising. James, what would be your barriers?
Thank you. Well, first off, I mean, I would echo Johannes Vogel's comments in the earlier plenary that I think, you know, the Commission is to be applauded for using this framework of open science, open innovation to draw together a whole set of very live, very pressing issues that do confront the research community writ large. And I think the Science 2.0 consultation did that very well. You know, it very much reflected the confluence of a whole set of issues. In terms of where all this goes, I suppose I still have a slight uncertainty as to the balance between what we might call a more technical and instrumental approach to some of these issues around open access, open data, you know, getting the infrastructure right, dealing with standards, all of which are absolutely vital and important, but which don't necessarily bring with them the other more full value-based normative account of open science that was sort of there in the broad canvas that was painted for us today by the Commissioner, but clearly introduces a lot of additional, quite difficult questions around engagement with publics, around power relations in the science innovation system, around choices not only to go forward faster or slower, but also to go potentially in multiple and different directions. And so I just sort of throw out really a question. I'm not fully clear myself conceptually how successfully or effectively those different elements of open science, open innovation are fully integrated, and you know, how the Commission and all the other actors in the broader European science innovation system will navigate some of the more difficult trade-offs that attach themselves to these issues. And I just wanted to throw in, you know, another concept we've heard a fair bit about over the last 2-3 years in the context of European research policy is responsible research and innovation. And I'm interested particularly in the connections, the overlaps, and perhaps also the tensions and discontinuities between what we've heard around open science, open innovation, and responsible research and innovation. I don't think they can just be unproblematically assumed to be the same thing. We need to actually think through how these different agendas combine, potentially reinforce one another, but also potentially pull in slightly different and conflicting directions. So that would be my general point. I'll perhaps come in my next specifically about metrics. This is something, as was mentioned, that we're looking at in detail now in the UK system. And I think this issue around how we measure, how we value research, the possibilities that are out there for different indicators, the way we incorporate those into policy, into research evaluation and assessment is a very, very interesting and also quite vexed test case for some of these issues. So I'll say more about that in a minute.
Thank you. We will come back to metrics, certainly. So there was the issue how different parts of open science interact with each other and how they match with each other. Catriona, the same question to you.
Well, I'd just like to endorse what the other two speakers have said in terms of open science being a fantastically progressive initiative. And as an open access publisher, when we launched 10 years ago, we were hoping that something like open science would happen, and it's just fantastic to see the EU taking that on. So I've got a list of 4 barriers, some of which I think we will be discussing in subsequent questions. But the first is just the main one. There are still huge barriers to reuse and to innovation. Open access to the literature, there's still only about 20 or 30% available as open access. There's a huge way to go before we start opening up the literature. And I think publishers need to start seeing themselves as service providers and not as providers of a product. And if they adopt that different attitude, then things like licenses and the type of licenses that are imposed on the literature, if you're putting a restrictive license, it's not a service to open science. Neither are embargoes a service to open science. There are ways and there are business models to pay for the service of publication and good quality peer review and still make all that literature available for reuse. And I wanted to echo Kurt's comment about the legal frameworks, because the fastest way to slow innovation is to maintain the status and entrench the status quo. And things like text and data mining, where it's absolutely crucial that there are public-private partnerships, and the European Molecular Biology Lab has a series of public-private partnerships going on. They need to be able to work with private partners for pre-competitive research. And so lifting the copyright restrictions on text and data mining for commercial and non-commercial research is absolutely vital as part of the open science program, and it is no threat to publishers. Publishers do not own facts. Facts are there to be mined. The other major barrier, I think, is a lack of hiring and firing system actually creates disincentives for collaborative behavior and openness. There is absolutely no personal reward for sharing information or for being transparent. And there are no rewards for scientists that actually support open science through activities other than publishing, such as curating databases, building collaborative software, and so on. Also, our greatest resource is the time and attention of experts. And yet we focus all their time and attention on meeting the needs of specific journals. Authors are writing for journals. Reviewers are reviewing for journals. They're not reviewing for their colleagues and for readers. And this means that things like the details, this affects the reliability of research, the details that should be in the methods about the experimental designs, about the analysis, the data that should be available with the paper isn't there because journals are constrained by legacy problems of page constraints, or it's put into the supplementary information. And so we need to change the behaviour, not just of researchers in terms of doing research, but as researchers in terms of authors and as reviewers, and to realise that actually putting in that detail, boring though it might be, especially to the high-impact journals, is absolutely essential for open science if the information in that paper is to be reused reliably. The reward system, and in particular the dependence on the journal impacts, is a real problem, and we need to move away from a one-dimensional system of assessment and evaluate a range of different outputs, not just articles, but the figures and tables within articles, the data within those tables, other forms of media, and as well as data. And this speaks to James's point about having a range of different metrics. And we all know that a paper in an impact factor, a journal with an impact factor of 30 is not 6 times better than a paper in a journal with an impact factor of 5. And in fact, we can't even analyze, it's based on citation data, we can't even analyze that citation data because it's held in a proprietary database. So independent scholars can't actually evaluate what citations mean.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we I just want to be fair for others as well, and I'm sure we'll come back to the publishing models because Wim will have a say definitely there, but I will pass over to Eva. Your list, we had already a long list of challenges, long list of obstacles, so what is your priority list there, please?
It is an honor to be part of this panel, and it turns out that the more people speak, the more difficult it is to say something intelligent. But I will try. Of course, I think there are many, or at least several challenges ahead to enable open science, but I will identify, just playing the 3 minutes thing, the 3 main challenges, and the 3 missing points, or better, the 3 things that I will change if I have the magic wand to do it. I think one of the first challenges that I see is that we need to convince the society that the open science is just the science. We need to convert the open science in the science by default. I think there is a big misunderstanding for the people at large, and even for researchers, about what open science is. And I think this is a big challenge it's a barrier to put people in the same page to do open research. I do agree with the results of the public consultation, and I think all the people that have been talking before. The big challenge is the lack of clear incentives. I play a game with the students of the PhD programs in my university, and I'm trying to incentivize to use the I am an open scientist because hashtag in Twitter, and they don't know how to say that. They are not convinced, they don't have an incentive, a clear argument to say why I want to be an open scientist if the system is going against the open science. And also, I do agree with Catriona that we need a complete new way to measure researchers. And also, we need to train people to become open scientists by default. They need to know how they are going to be measured, and they need to know, and they need to apply for that. And identifying the 3 things that we are missing in this, related with the 3 main challenges that I identified, I think we need to make an effort of making a common understanding of open science. Even this shift from Science 2.0 to open science to science in transition, if you talk to people in the university out of this field, mainly of them, they don't know it. If you go to the Bachelor and you ask the people there, they don't know what is open science and Science 2.0. So we need to make a strong literacy on open data and open science, literacy to all the people. Another thing that we are missing is that public funding research is PSI, is public sector information. When we do public research, we are producing public data, we are producing public sector information, and all those data, by default, in my opinion, they should be reusable. And as we like to say now, they have to be fair. That means fundable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And also, we really need to think over that not all the fields are the same. We need this horizontal approach to convince the society about what open science is. But in terms of metrics, in terms of evaluation, we need also a vertical approach. I mean, a domain-oriented or disciplinary open science approach, especially for the assessment mechanism. And that makes me, in my mind, the joke when you are with the animals making an exam and they say to make a fair selection, all the animals are going to be evaluated with the same exam. You have to climb the tree. And you ask that to an elephant, to a monkey, and to a fish. The fish will never be tenured. So we need to have a horizontal, a domain-oriented approach to open science too. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wim, Katrina already touched several issues from the publisher side. Are those issues as important from Springer as well, or are there any differences in your priority lists?
Yeah, being fifth makes the problem even worse for me. Saying new things is almost impossible. And it might surprise you. I agree with actually everything that has been said, because I think we all are convinced that this is something that will happen anyway, if we like it or not, and that we'd better figure out ways to make it happen in a way that everybody, that all stakeholders fit. I think, from a publisher perspective, the real key challenge is that there is a very small market for open science still, and I on purpose say market because I want to put ourselves a little bit on the let's say the market side of this discussion. And the fact that there is no market is for a commercial company very difficult to change their models, because if the customers don't ask for something that you want to deliver, and believe me, as Springer, you can believe me, really, we want to deliver open access, open science, whatever it is. Then you have to do two things at the same time. You have to stay alive. You have to keep on having your old system, where PLOS doesn't have the old system, so they don't have to worry about that, because there is still, let's say, 9/10 of the world that asks for that old system, and for all kind of reasons, in tenure making and evaluation and wrong metrics and etc. etc. It's all true, but the truth is that is still the question. So we still have to kind of support these different systems, and that is, I think, a major barrier to speed in the process. We have to be clear. As long as there's so much world outside of Europe that is not supporting open science, because open science is per definition global, it cannot be different, then that is a big challenge in itself also. As long as this fast-growing Chinese output doesn't have the right incentives to go to open science, there is really a problem that that it won't move, because the old system apparently for these communities still works. And I think, therefore, and I have to say I don't speak on behalf of all scientific publishers here, but really on the name of Springer Nature, we strongly believe that their fundamental mandates help. Because scientists by themselves will not move very easily, so their strong fundamental mandates can help. The RCUK mandate in the UK is a very good example of that. Also, although you can discuss all outcomes of that, and of course it's never perfect, but at least it has caused the UK to move into an open access direction, and that is I think, a very important step into the development of open science. And still, of course, it's not ready, but it's a step. I think it's the major step set somewhere in the world at the moment. But the EU, the Horizon 2020 policy, merely causes confusion. It doesn't choose. It says gold, green, can be anything. It has no preference. It's not 100% clear about how to get the money to finance gold. And worse, and even the very worst for us, is the embargo of 6 months is too short to keep the journal system in place, which is necessary if you want to have a green open access policy in place. So I think the Horizon 2020 policy can really need some renewal. When developing further policies for the next phases of open science, we demand the ECSO to involve all stakeholders actively, and this is actually a very good start of doing that, or maybe it's not even a start, but I was not there yet before this, by taking our knowledge, our experience, and also our willingness and willingness to cooperate, to serve our clients, because that's basically what it is. If scientists ask for open science, we would be crazy not to deliver that and not see ourselves, thank you, Catriona, as a service industry, which, by the way, has been done. We see that. So I think it's very important that we come together and cooperatively, sorry, difficult word, discuss European open science and how to get there the fastest and the most efficient and effective.
Thank you very much. To everybody in the audience, we tried to save time in the end for your questions or your short remarks as well. But first we go on with the second question, ring of questions, which is more specific to every panelist. And now, having identified the challenges, the barriers, the problems which need solution, let's try to figure out what we can do to solve those things, or who could do what to solve the problems. And Eva, you're speaking about science literacy, open science literacy, and about the mentality thing and attitude thing. So what do you think what we could actually do? Could we teach the thing, whom we could teach, and how we could organize that?
Okay, I think we need to train everybody on this field, actually. But I think that what we really need is to change the attitude. For me, in life, everything is a question of attitude. As soon as you change the attitude, you can change the world. The point is that the only way that I know about how to improve or to change the attitude is training and education. I'm an educator and a faculty member. I teach people. I teach information literacy. I will bet that in 5 years' time, I will be teaching data literacy or open data literacy or something like that. I think it's very important to train everybody. For example, of course, we have to train the new researchers. We have been putting the focus on the new researchers. For example, FOSTER, which is a project funded by the European Commission, they train new faculty members, new PhD students, and we focus very much on that training. But I think we need also to train the senior researchers, because to be an open scientist is not a question of seniority. It is, again, a question of attitude. And I think we need also to train the trainers. We need to train, for example, academic librarians, research staff, to be training the open scientists to make the researchers to do a good job on using the right tools, embrace the open science. We listened this morning about the new infrastructure, the new cloud of open science, but we need to train people to know how to use these new infrastructures. And also, we need to train all the other parts of this open science ecosystem. We need to train the new researchers, and I will do that by default. For example, as a transversal education, every single PhD in Europe has to follow a course on open science, for example, where they have to be trained on how they are going to be measured. Because if they told them that they are going to be measured based on impact factor, they will never follow the other thing. So we have to be consistent what you teach and what we try to pursue. And also, in terms of how to teach this, I'm now in charge of open education channels in the MOOCs trends. And I think it's a fantastic way to make the MOOC, the European Commission fantastic MOOC on open science, to all the stakeholders, that everybody can self-educate, self-train themselves in knowing all the stakeholders' roles, or knowing all the mechanisms, knowing all the metrics, knowing all the alternatives, and knowing all the impact factor of the open science, which is to make a better world. That's it. Make it.
Thank you, Eva. So James, Eva's question: how we are going to measure the success? What will have to be changed in the university structural level, and also how we promote the independent individual researchers, how we measure the success of institutes, or faculties, or other things. So how we measure that?
Thanks. Well, as mentioned earlier, we're in the UK about to publish on the 9th of July the results of a year-long review of the future role of metrics in the research system, and this is a study that was commissioned by the UK government and the Higher Education Funding Council in the UK, which administers the REF, the Research Excellence Framework. So these questions have been very much at the heart of what we've been doing, and clearly, you know, the title of the report that we're publishing is The Metric Tide, reflecting the fact that there are some very powerful currents whipping up that tide, which we've been touching on already today. In terms of what we do, we have made a number of recommendations directed towards different players in the research system, to HEIs, to data providers, publishers, research funders, etc., looking at how the possibilities, the potential of new indicators, new metrics can be taken advantage of, can be incorporated into the way we manage and run the research system, but the potential downsides can be minimized. And I think if we look at the debate around research metrics and indicators, it's clearly quite a polarized debate. There is, of course, great potential to use new indicators and existing bibliometric indicators to support the directions that we're talking about here in terms of more open science, more diverse forms of science. And particularly, I think, the emergence of all of these new alternative metrics that try and measure different forms of societal impact are really exciting in terms of incentivizing and recognizing modes of research and modes of interaction between research and the wider world that aren't traditionally captured in the metrics and reward structures that we've grown up with. But at the same time, as we've already been hearing just in the last few minutes, we've got lots of examples of where particular indicators, particular metrics can be quite corrosive in terms of their effects on the system, and the tyranny of the journal impact factor is the best example of that. And reactions to that, like the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, are symbolic, symptomatic of a real and I think legitimate sense of disquiet across the community about inappropriate, irresponsible use of metrics in research management and assessment. So we've tried in the report we're about to bring out to sort of chart a path through that. I don't have time now to explain all of what we're saying in that report. Suffice to say, we are actually drawing, going back to my earlier comment, on the framework for responsible research and innovation that has had some traction here and across a number of member states, to put forward a framework for thinking about responsible metrics, a way that takes advantage, as I say, of their potential, but tries to minimize some of these negative consequences. And just to mention in very brief what the kind of features of responsible metrics are, we're saying firstly that they need to be robust, they need to be based on the best possible data in terms of accuracy and scope. They need to reflect a degree of humility, recognizing that quantitative evaluation usually should support but not supplant other forms of qualitative expert assessment in research systems. We've emphasized the importance of transparency, keeping data collection and analytical processes open and transparent, and placing great emphasis on issues around data infrastructure, interoperability, identifiers, ORCID numbers, all these sorts of things that are the plumbing of an open science system. We've also emphasized diversity, accounting for variation by field, and using a variety of indicators to support broader diversity across the research system. And finally, reflexivity, recognizing that indicators do have power, they have real effects on research culture, on the behavior of individuals and of institutions, and we need to be more reflective about that. We need to encourage those who are being evaluated through various indicators to themselves participate in the definition of those indicators, and in that way we can try and move this small piece of the system around indicators in a more positive and progressive direction. So lots more on all of that on the 9th of July, the metric tide.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kurt, in your first answer, you sounded a little bit skeptical about the procedure, about the legal problems, about the awareness problems, about technical match of different features of open science. LERO is certainly a very powerful organization, and LERO can do a lot to promote, actually, open science. Are there any concrete plans what LERO is doing? Are there any concrete developments how to support the member universities to absorb the tendencies of science?
Thank you, Toivo. Can I have the rest of the afternoon for that? Or?
No, unfortunately not.
I'm always realistic, so in that sense, I try to be prudent on all kinds of things. So obviously, LERO is already working on a very broad variety of issues, I would say, in order to prepare our institutions and their staff members for open science. And I think that we can say that on a number of issues, we develop a kind of three-stage approach, in a sense that we, first of all, on a number of developments, we inform our staff, academic, non-academic staff. In a second stage, then we try to promote that with our staff, academic and non-academic. And in a third phase, I would say that we go for the implementation of what we have been putting on the table. And we certainly have done this, for example, with the roadmap that we have been publishing on open access publications, where we have clearly sketched out for our members how they have to develop their own institutions into green open access, and when the financial and technical circumstances are right, when we can move to gold open access. The same we have done with regard to research data management. Also there we have developed for our members a roadmap which indicates to them what are the issues which are at stake financially, technically, legally, and all those issues have been brought together in a roadmap that can bring them into a situation where research data management is possible. And obviously those roadmaps are public documents in a sense that we of course hope that this is not something that is only reaching our own members of the group, but also will be picked up by many more universities in Europe or beyond Europe in helping them, in guiding them to develop an open access publications policy on the one hand and a research data management policy on the other hand. Obviously, we know that if we go to open access publications, if we go to research data management, that this also has as a kind of consequence that we have to put significant emphasis on research integrity. And that's why we have always said, after the roadmaps on open access publications and research data management, if everything is open, if everything is accessible, if everything is usable, then we must be sure at the end of the day that, of course, our people also treat everything with the necessary research integrity. And that's why we are working for the moment, just like other organizations in Europe, on the issue of research integrity. We are looking forward to the proposals that the Luxembourg presidency is going to make on that in the following months. But it's clear that we are not going to support, I already want to mention that now today, we are of course not going to support the kind of ideas which are here floating around, that from an EU side, of course, all kinds of sanctions would be imposed on the institutions themselves if a number of cases of violation of research integrity rules would be discovered. It's a question that universities have to take their own responsibility on this issue. It are our staff, it are our people, and we have to make sure that at the end of the day, things are going well there. And this broadens, of course, the scope of the set of activities, which was also indicated in the consultation. It's clear that obviously as universities, as scientific community, we have to link better with society. In a sense, we have to explain better to society what we are doing with all the tax money that we are getting. And on the other hand, we have to involve society much more in the activities that we are developing. So I would say that this new societal contract, which was proposed by Anne Glover a number of months or years ago already in her activities as Chief Scientific Advisor, is certainly something that we would like to have a look at again. MOOCs were mentioned. We have developed, I think, a very nice set of ideas in a paper on online learning, where we say, obviously, blended learning is the way of the future. We try not to get into the hype of MOOCs, but we certainly want to have, again, a realistic approach on that. Coming back to what James has been mentioning, peer review, metrics and things like that. On peer review, we will have very intense activities in the fall with LERU. We don't believe anymore that peer review is the least worst solution around. It's clear that peer review has a number of clear problems. It's clear that we cannot say that those problems are unsolvable and that we have to stick with peer review as it exists today. LERU wants to come up, hopefully by the end of the year, with a number of new ideas and suggestions on alternatives for peer review. As LERU, as an organization, we have signed up to what James already mentioned, the San Francisco Declaration, because we are, of course, also convinced of the fact that the quality of a publication should not be measured alone by the journal in which it is published, but perhaps it would be good every now and then that we go back to the quality of the article itself, instead of just believing, because it is published in a specific journal, that it should be fantastic. LERU is also now in the process of signing up to the Hague Declaration, which LIBER, our close sister organization, well, not sister organization, but it's certainly an organization at EU level with whom we are collaborating a lot. A fantastic declaration focusing on text and data mining. As Catriona already indicated, it's really clear that in the upcoming copyright reform, we must have a mandatory exception for text and data mining, not overridable by private contracts, applicable for commercial and non-commercial purposes, and for research and education purposes in general. Finally, I just want to mention that LERU, as an organization, is not the only organization which is working very intensively on these issues. I know that my colleagues from the EUA, for example, Lydia Borrell is here sitting also at this side of the room. They are also working very hard on those issues. The colleagues in the Eurotech University Alliance, in IDEA, and other organizations in the ERA platform, all of them are working very hard, and it's clear that for all of us at the university side, in the European science community, this is absolutely crucial for the future.
Thank you, Kurt. It didn't take the whole afternoon, but we do understand that LERU is doing a lot. Thank you. Catriona, PLOS does a lot of open access publishing. Do you think there is anything open access publisher can do to promote the open science? Are there any activities what you would like to do or you could do? And especially I would be interested in your comment about Kurt's sayings about peer review process and alternatives to peer review. Please.
Yes, and I'll try and keep to my 3 minutes this time. So the first thing is, as an open access publisher, we make all our articles available under a license that permits anyone to read, distribute, reuse it, mine the information as long as there's appropriate attribution. We also introduced a data sharing policy last year, and this asks authors to make the data available with their papers on publication and to publish a statement in their paper about where that data can be found. And this is actually, it's not perfect, it's very difficult to enforce. But for one subject area alone last year, between the start of our policy in March and November, the papers that made the data available, increased from under 4,000 to over 13,000. And so I think having that sort of policy as an open access publisher can really make a difference to data. And I think the Horizon 2020 data pilot is also a fantastic initiative supporting that. Then going down to the sort of assessment levels, we've introduced article level metrics, and I agree with all that James has said about the problems of relying on any one metric too heavily. The software that we used to create the article metrics is now being used by Crossref in a pilot to provide events or what they call DOI event trackers. So the ability to track certain events around any object with the DOI. So that could be an article, a figure. Only about 10 to 20% of articles in UK repositories have a DOI, but there's absolutely no reason that everything else in repositories could have a DOI and metrics could start to be used and evaluated. And it's very important that the data is available for evaluation just to see what these metrics are doing for different subject areas. In relation to peer review, it's very difficult to know how effective peer review is because it's behind a black box. And again, the data are not available for independent scholars outside the publishing industry to actually evaluate how effective it is. We know there are lots of high cases of fraud, retractions, but we actually don't know if it works or whether that's just an increase in the reporting of fraud or it's been there. So PLOS is going to be introducing open peer review over the next year. We also want to make we want to give authors the ability to make their articles available immediately before publication after they've gone through some ethical and technical checks so that the whole process of peer review will be transparent and open to reviewers outside the sort of facilitated review process. And we also want to introduce a whole range of new generation tools, firstly to help showcase articles and make them more discoverable. And this is really an idea to allow communities to congregate around outputs, regardless of where it's published, and move away from the sort of journal as the focus of everyone's attention, and rather focus on the needs of specific communities and the sorts of content they want. And we're also going to be introducing new authoring and reviewing tools that foster greater openness and transparency and collaboration with the core software available for use by the community. And in terms of business models, we have a business model that, where we charge a publication fee. But as I said earlier, publishers need to start thinking about themselves as services, and Wim's right, and Springer's doing that, and a whole range of other publishers are. But to promote competition, the pricing of these services needs to be transparent, as peer review is going to be, hopefully. And institutions and funders should make what they pay for the different services public. Because transparency will create a more effective market and help to drive some of the costs down. And one way that this can easily be done is not to sign, is to ask institutions not to sign non-disclosure deals with publishers. I think I can leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wim, Springer is more, if you compare with PLOS, is more traditional publisher, I would say. So, and the business models are a little bit different between two of you. Are there things which PLOS is thinking about sort of realistic for your models as well, or what are your plans to change in Springer together with existing developments?
Well, first of all, I'd like to challenge the fact that we're traditional, because we might have some traditional business models. That is true, but we're far from traditional as a company because there's a lot of innovation going on. And actually, the only thing that really differentiates us from PLOS is, apart from the fact that we own Biomed Central, which is the first open access publisher in the world ever, but second, the real thing that is different from PLOS is that we have a big traditional part of our company that still operates very successfully the subscription model. And as said in my previous statement, that's difficult for us to just throw away because it's successful. Nevertheless, we develop very, very quickly into the open environment, and I know that most of my colleague traditional, between brackets, publishers do so. And there is no reason to think that we could not do all these changes and will not do all these changes that you are talking about. Because many of these changes are irrespective of the fact if open science is going to be developed. It is science in general, and science communication is changing, and of course a company like ours is acting to respond to that change. Some of the things like altmetrics, etc., are really dependent upon the content to be open, and there I think that is important to see that that the openness of the content more and more starts defining the new developments, and we as a publisher we really work for that. I can only say for our own company that can give you, and without being too much in defense, but I just want to give you the environment where we are in. We have multiple open access models in all kind of ways. You can publish with open access with us. Last year we published more than 40,000 open access publishers, which is the size of a medium publishing company. And so we really developed that open access very, very quickly. We have hybrid journals, we have open access journals, we have open access books, data journals, data repositories, etc., etc. Now with Springer Nature, we even have this digital science part in our company, which is really developing new models for the communication. And I think maybe the most breathtaking thing at the moment is that we're also on a large scale experimenting with what we now call offsetting schemes in our world, which is kind of trying to trade in the money that has been paid for subscription money for subscription access so far to be offset against open access rights to publish, in a sense. And in that sense, I'd like to do the statement here that I think that the hybrid model is really the new positive transition model. Because if we think that open access is going to develop into the main model, the main thing that we need to do is take burdens away for authors to make the decision to publish open access, and their hybrid can really help under, of course, under conditions that we have to discuss together. So that is to state that we really do a lot in open access. It's very difficult to predict the future, and there will be for sure new models around in the future. Maybe, but the best example is maybe the whole journal. We can really challenge if the journal will still exist in 10 years. Why would it? There could be nano publications. There could be all kind of triplets. Who knows it? And of course, we're following that very closely to see what our role there will be, because we think that our role is still very important also in an open access world. It is, especially for this integrity part of science, I think it is really important that we keep on seeing the publisher's major added value, identification, validation, and structuring of scientific research in such a way that it is findable for the researcher and usable by the researcher or by its machine or whatever is going to do scientific research in the future. We don't know that yet. And I think that maybe not all, but the vast majority of so-called traditional scientific publishers are really ready to go to co-develop with the scientific communities that kind of future.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for the audience to give you questions or short interventions after you heard these really inspiring thoughts from basically two different stakeholders, from the university side and from the publisher side. Please, the questions. Yes, please, over there.
I'm Jan van den Biezen from Philips. We mainly heard about researchers in academia and institutes so far, but about 2/3 of all R&D in Europe is being performed or paid by business. So let me say a few words from the business perspective. So first, open access to scientific publications is not so much an issue for industry. And I'm now quoting the standpoint of Business Europe on this matter. So there we have seen how the pilot in FP7 went, and that went well, so this is now accepted and workable. We have a little bit more hesitation regarding open access to research data. Because first of all, it's not clear what we are talking about. It is said that it deals with publicly funded research. But what about funded research that is partly funded by industry or partly performed by industry or in collaboration of industry and academia? You can very well imagine that the incentive, we're talking about incentives today, the incentive for industry to invest in something where the results, by definition, will be distributed all over the world, is not very appetizing. So, and the other thing is, what data? All research data or just the underlying data underlying to publication? The latter is easier than the former. And for that reason, we would like to see a situation where on a case-by-case basis we could decide with the partners in the consortium whether it is appropriate or not to grant open access to research data, and if so, to which data. And there are cases where we also see the benefit of making it open, but there are also cases where we certainly would not like to see that. And from that perspective, the current pilot with an opt-out provision is something that we would like to keep also in the future.
Thank you very much. Intervention, I think bringing in the topic of industrial research is very important as well, and this just adds up to the legal problems which were dear to Kurt's heart as well. I agree with that, but it's important to have it here. There's another question over there down. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Hi, Eleanor Perfect from PwC. This is a question, I think, for James. I'm interested to know if you believe the Research Excellence Framework in the UK actually prevents academics from pursuing long-term cutting-edge research in favour for sort of shorter scale projects to help their universities to climb the ranking.
Was that particular question to somebody from the panelists?
Yeah, to James. I want to know.
James, please.
Just quickly. Well, in short, no. The REF is far from perfect, and there's an industry of complaint over aspects of it if you talk to anyone in the UK university system. But at the same time, it, in its successive cycles since the mid-80s, has been part of the framework which has helped UK research to be more productive, improved its management, and it's been the accountability and audit framework through which government allocates large amounts of public funding, not to short-term project-based research, but to exactly what you're describing, to more open-ended research. So the money, without going too far into the way the UK funding system works, but within the UK research funding system, we have these two legs: the money through the research councils, which competed for in the normal way, the money that comes through the REF. Once you've been through the exercise, which is of course time-consuming, you then are given an allocation of money for the next 5 years based on your performance over the previous 5-6 years, and the way in which that money is spent is not controlled. So universities are free to use it to invest in new areas of research, to support emerging researchers, and to use it essentially as a pot for investment in the things that they think matter. So I think it's a very precious and important feature of the UK system, and in the UK right now we've obviously got a new government, or a re-elected sole government, as it were, going through a spending review, and I think a lot of us in the system are worried that that part of the system might come under greater pressure. So there's a lot that can be done to improve the REF. There's a huge amount in our report coming out in July that talks about this. Metrics has been floated as one solution. Could you switch the whole thing to a metrics-based system? Our short answer to that question is no, not now, not over the next 5 years. What we can do progressively over 2-3 cycles of the REF, assuming it continues, along the rhythm that we've had since the 1980s, you can introduce more of the infrastructure around data to enable these positive opportunities for quantitative indicators to be better incorporated into the system over time. But you can't switch overnight from a system which is currently peer review based to one that's metric based without yielding a very different set of outcomes.
Thank you very much. There was a question down there, please. Yes.
So that's me, yeah. So my name's Elizabeth Crossick. I'm from RELX, a company you probably haven't heard of, but Reed Elsevier you probably have. Reed Elsevier, well, the Elsevier part of it being the not so traditional publisher. RELX, more the change of name, showing or indicating we're much more of this solution service provider, and that's the way we're looking at our business. I would just obviously concur with much that Wim has said. All our publications now have an open access solution, and we have about 150 pure open access publications. But enough of the publicity piece. I actually have a question, or rather something to think about. One of the things that we are very concerned about and working hard on, and I'm sure with Wim and other publishers, is the issue about open access to data. And this is quite a different issue from the publications piece, because we signed a commitment some years ago that is public, and there isn't a copyright, there isn't a license issue around that. So it's much more of a fundamental problem around how do you encourage researchers to deposit their data, and it's much around these incentives. And one of the things there is about how you connect the data sets with their researcher identifiers. So I'm wondering whether any of the esteemed panelists have a concept around maybe not cradle to grave ORCID, but an ORCID, a prescriptive ORCID identifier that is given maybe on arrival to university, and that as part of the the assessment every year, made sure that the student, and then to become researcher, is then responsible for updating the ORCID profile, because that way you can make sure that that's one way of helping with the data sets problem, which I think we all have.
Thank you. Eva, would you like to?
Yeah, I think I can just give you a point. I think it's a question of infrastructure. What you are putting on the table is that we need more than the literature and saying we need to share the data. We need to make the data available, reusable, and linked to the other research outcomes and also the researchers, because we will never evaluate the researchers if we are not able in the same platform. I think it's a question of also the incentive of you have to, then the infrastructure where you can put those data connected to the researchers, and also the technologies in place now allow that. All the expert systems like Link Open Database, they can do that. So we need to have the same regulation for Europe to do that, and we need to have the same platform. It's my opinion, probably.
Thank you very much. I do see there are more questions around, but unfortunately, I have to cut the questions from the audience right here. I'm sure all the panelists will be very happy to answer later today or tomorrow those questions. Simply that's the time format what we have been given. And I would like to come back to the questions, direct question to the panelists, because that's the main question, I think, why we are here today. Imagine that you are a Commissioner Moedas, and one of your priorities, as he told today us, is open science, in addition to open innovation and open world. And I have the mandate, I have the power, I have everything, so what should I now do concretely to achieve better, more open science in Europe? So what would be your recommendations to the Commissioner? Kurt, please.
I start? Okay, first of all, we are very glad with the priorities that Commissioner Moedas has put forward. In the paper that we did as LERU for the incoming European Commission and the incoming European Parliament last year, we made an explicit plea that the original 5 ERA priorities, which were indicated in the 2012 ERA communication, would be supplemented by a number of other ERA priorities, and for us, open science was one of those additional priorities which had to move up on the agenda of the Commission and of the Member States. So we're very glad to see today that open science, open innovation, open to the world is now going to be the main priorities of the Commission. I would like to make a distinction, if you say what has to be done, I would like to make a distinction between topics which have already quite evolved quite a lot, which have already a lot of experience, I would say, and on the other hand, a number of issues where we still will probably need some best practices, experiences, stimulation of people, of institutions and things like that, to develop them much more. In a first group of issues, I would like to bring issues for which, as LERU, we say it's absolutely crucial that a level playing field throughout the EU is created. And that goes then about issues like open access, research data management, copyright, TDM, general data protection. If we are serious about open science, then that means, the question is, what role can policymakers play here? Well, that means that the policymakers will have to take initiatives to create a level playing field for those issues. And obviously, this level playing field should have a kind of European frame in which the national member states then can have their own input and play their own role, in which also, of course, the research funding organizations and the research performing organizations will then have to pick up and to implement what has been decided. But it's clear that on a number of those issues, we cannot continue with 28 different policies, with 28 different approaches on those issues. A second group of issues, I would say, are dealing with awareness raising, the development of best practices, and I think that, for example, on peer review, on metrics, on citizen science, we need more experience, more initiatives which can sketch a better picture of the issue. For example, LERU is embarking on an exercise to develop a number of standards of excellence for citizen science. We absolutely, that was my first point that I made this afternoon, we absolutely want to be sure about this quality assurance of the info which is coming out of citizen science, and we think that it is really important to develop a number of standards of excellence. And it's clear that support for all these initiatives can come from EU funding, EU workshops, EU forums, and things like that, which can be stimulated by the Commission, but also by the Member States. If you look at the ERA experience that we have the ERA platform at EU level, but we see in more and more Member States national ERA platforms popping up. And I think that this would be a good approach also to deal with issues like peer review, metrics, citizen science, and things like that, so that we also there then, in due course, can come to a European-wide level playing field. This in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Eva, what do you think the Commission should start with tomorrow?
I would like to start tomorrow, but I think the Commission and in general the funder agencies, they play a key role in the how to facilitate and motivate or just make happen the open science. But I will say that they have at least 4 aspects that it can be really important to make available open science. For my opinion, one is governance, the other one is incentives, and the other one is infrastructure, as I referred a bit before, and also transparency. I will go a bit more further in every of them, but I always say that there are at least 2 motivators of will, you know. One is law, and the other one is money. We need law, we need rules, we need mandates to make things compulsory, and we need money to make them possible. So I think this is the key two roles of the Commission, but I will just talk about in a lighter way about governance and incentives and things like that. But the motivation, we know that is that. And also there is a new very important motivation that probably the Commission can have a role or can play a bit, which is rankings. If you tell people that you are going to measure them, they just pay attention, like when you say then that you will give them money. So in terms of governance, I think that besides an open data and open access mandates, the Commission has to have a code of responsible conduct. We have been saying this morning research integrity. They also need to go deeper in technical mandates. I think it's crucial if we want to make an interoperable science that the Commission also have a mandate, a recommendation on standards in a technical basis. And also in the terms of incentives, we need to see from the Commission identifying the hotspots and interconnection in the specific fields or societal challenges, and also provide more regular funding, for example, to research networks that they are identified, because sometimes the incentive is too scattered, I mean, in terms of money. And also in infrastructure, I think to support all these approach of open science, we need a conclusive infrastructure that we can call a virtual research environment. We can call it the lab, as we call it in the workshop that we did in April. We can call it whatever it is, find an expert in European Research Area.eu, but we really need to have a conclusive infrastructure where we can play with, measure, have a repository, have a visibility of the research. And also to be consistent with all this openness trend that I think is the basis of the things that we are constructing right now, I think the Commission needs to be transparent. I don't think that we need exactly to make a transparent evaluation, but perhaps we need to have open public deliverables instead of just deliverables, or we need to have a way of evaluation like a crowdsourcing evaluation or something like make the transparency part of the consistency with the openness.
Thank you very much. Wim, in 2 minutes, what could the Commission...
Gets shorter and shorter. 4 points I have. First of all, I think it's important to state that we think that the market should do its work. So you should also, the EC should let the market do its work and not invest too much money in suboptimal, public money in suboptimal solutions like infrastructure, etc. The market will do its work there, and believe me, it will. But maybe more important, I think it's very important that we now stop evangelizing too much, stop telling each other how great everything is, but that we talk together about the solutions, about how we're going to establish what we, in basic, maybe even think that maybe we even agree that we go there, but if we don't agree, it's you who want to go there, so then you have to stimulate it. And I think it would be very good to sit together and in a Finch-like process. I really take that always as an example, because that was the first time that publishers, universities, libraries, funders, everybody sat together and started understanding each other more than ever. And I think that has given some results. I think it's very important that there will be incentives for scientists to go open science. This is one of the, I really think this is the biggest stopper at the moment. And I think also very important that the EC could use its international position to keep on telling other areas in the world why Europe thinks it's important to go into an open access or an open science direction. Because one of the big other problems of open science is that it's per definition global, and it's pity enough, but a big part of this world is not on the same level as the EU there. So we have to kind of use our influence there more.
Thank you. Katriona, the same question. What should the Commission do?
So I agree with Wim. We need to be practical and do what we can immediately. And one of the things, the simplest things, just to support Elizabeth next door to me, that the EU can do is to ensure that scholarly information is machine readable. Perhaps the least useful thing anyone can do is to put something on the web, and it's generally as a PDF. And so things like mandating ORCIDs for the grantees, ensuring that there are FundRef, common standards and metadata associated with all sorts of outputs, so that the information is not just discoverable, but institutions and funders are able to track that information, regardless in the network where that's happening. The other issue, and to support Ava, is to start discussing much more explicitly the importance of transparency and celebrate examples of openness in review, accessibility in communication, reward open behavior. While I think mandates are useful, I think the EU has an opportunity to put the frameworks and mechanisms in place that will set the research community in the appropriate direction of travel. In terms of assessment of researchers, collecting data, as James was saying, about metrics, asking for evidence about the evaluation of researchers in research assessment itself and making that data available for independent scrutiny is hugely important. Open up the grant review process for community critique, find out how effective it is. And adopt and contribute to open source community governed solutions. I think a top-down approach is not necessarily the one that's going to work. And speaking to what Wim has said, this is a global, research is a global enterprise. Whether it's an institution or a national body, if they do things in isolation, it's not going to work. And we need collaboration across all stakeholders. And it was great to hear Commissioner Modis this morning talking about expanding the European research area to China and Latin America, working with funders in the States and in those two countries and across Europe will be absolutely essential to put these common standards and metadata in place and to promote open science.
Thank you. James, you're very practical.
Sure. Well, I also agree with Wim that we need to stop evangelizing and roll our sleeves up and get on with this stuff. Where I disagree, though, is on this question over infrastructure. I do think while the market can do certain things, this is clearly an area where government has a role to play, just as in other areas of infrastructure. And this is certainly something that we've looked at and thought hard about in the context of research metrics. I think there is a great need for greater transparency, greater openness in research data infrastructure. We need to reduce black boxing. We need to increase both transparency and trustworthiness in the data capture systems, the indicators that we use. Because he's there across the table from me, let me commend to those who haven't read it the set of principles for open scholarly infrastructure that Cameron Nayland and Jeff Bilder and Jennifer Lynn published a few months ago, which I think sets out a very helpful framework that should inform the way the Commission addresses these issues at the European level. Within that, things like identifiers, things like ORCID are absolutely key. We're pushing ORCID very hard in our report. We're saying that it should be mandated for all researchers going into the next REF in the UK, which should help to further push a bandwagon that is already well and truly rolling in respect of ORCID. But I think just as a final point, the other question in all of this is where and through what means do all the different players in these debates come together to think through these questions of data standards, of interoperability, of transparency and openness. And this is again something that we're thinking hard about in the UK research system. One of the questions that the review has looked at is sort of how do we pull together the different funders, HEFCE, the research councils, Wellcome Trust, the universities, data providers, publishers, to talk through and work through some of these questions, whether in respect of the next REF cycle in the UK or other aspects of the system. And I guess the same needs to happen at the European level. So I would hope that the Commissioner can be giving thought to the fora through which these discussions take place. And I hope the UK, for as long as we're still active members of the European Union, and I very much hope that we are, I hope that the UK can play an active role in that, and that our review can contribute in a modest way to discussions here in the Commission.
Thank you, James. We all hope you will. So this is the end of the session. Our time's out. I would like to thank very much the distinguished panelists. I would like to thank you for your questions and for your participation, and I hope this made the world a little bit better. Thank you.